Hello everyone, I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching now? There's something about empty roads at midnight that feels wrong. Maybe it's the eerie stillness, or the way shadows seem to stretch longer than they should. Or maybe it's the way your mind starts playing tricks on you, convincing you that you're not really alone. It was supposed to be a quick drive, a shortcut home through the back roads to save time. The GPS marked the route as safe, the roads straight and clear. But as soon as I turned onto that desolate stretch of asphalt, I knew I'd made a mistake. The road was narrow, lined with tall, skeletal trees that swayed in the faint breeze. The headlights barely pierced the darkness, illuminating only the immediate path ahead. There were no streetlights, no signs of life, just the endless stretch of road that seemed to go on forever. And then, the first sign of something wrong, a figure standing at the edge of the road. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The figure didn't move, its silhouette barely visible in the faint glow of my high beams. I slowed the car, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. As I passed, the figure turned its head slowly, its face obscured in shadow. I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. But that was only the beginning. The road ahead would hold more than just shadows. It would test my sanity. The road stretched endlessly into the darkness, the twin beams of my headlights cutting through the thick, suffocating night. The trees on either side seemed alive, their twisted branches swaying as though they were reaching for the car. The wind outside was faint, but carried an unnatural chill that seeped through the windows, prickling my skin. The figure I had passed earlier lingered in my mind. Who were they? Why were they standing out there in the middle of nowhere, on an empty road with no cars, no houses, no sign of civilization for miles? I shook the thought away, convincing myself it was just a lost hiker, or maybe someone whose car had broken down. But no matter how much I rationalized it, the unease wouldn't leave me. The silence inside the car was deafening. I turned on the radio, hoping to fill the void with some music or chatter, but the static hissed loudly, the signal too weak to pick anything up. I fiddled with the dial, but it was useless. Just more static, rising and falling in a faint, rhythmic hum that sent chills racing down my spine. The further I drove, the stranger the road seemed. The trees appeared denser now, their shadows creeping onto the asphalt like dark tendrils. The air inside the car felt heavier, the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves wafting through the vents. My hands tightened on the wheel as I squinted into the distance, searching for anything, another car, a sign, anything to ground me in reality. And then I saw it. A faint glow appeared on the road ahead, flickering like the dying embers of a fire. I slowed the car, my heart pounding as I approached. The glow came into focus, a small lantern, swaying gently from a tree branch that hung low over the road. Beneath it was a figure, seated on the edge of the road with their back to me. I stopped the car, the engine idling as I stared. The figure didn't move. Their head was tilted downward, their shoulders slumped as though they were deep in thought, or asleep. The lantern cast an eerie glow, illuminating their outline, but leaving their face obscured in shadow. My fingers hovered over the horn, but something stopped me. The stillness of the scene felt wrong, like I was intruding on something I wasn't meant to see. The figure didn't react to my headlights, didn't flinch as the wind tugged at their clothes. I rolled down the window slightly, the cold night air rushing in. "Hey," I called out, my voice trembling. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. The figure remained perfectly still, the lantern's light swaying softly above them. A sudden chill ran down my spine as I noticed something I hadn't before. The trees around the figure were different. Their trunks were gnarled and blackened, as though they had been scorched by fire. The ground beneath them was barren, devoid of the leaves and moss that covered the rest of the forest floor. The whispers started then, soft at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but they grew louder, threading through the still night air, their tones rhythmic and deliberate. My chest tightened as I scanned the road ahead, searching for the source of the sound. It didn't seem to come from the figure or the trees. It came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The figure shifted slightly, their head turning just enough to reveal a glimpse of their face. My breath hitched as I saw it, not a face, but a hollow void where features should have been. The whispers swelled, overlapping into a chaotic hum that pressed against my ears like a physical weight. I slammed the window shut, my hands shaking as I threw the car into drive. The figure remained still as I sped past, the lantern's glow fading into the distance. My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped the wheel tightly, the whispers echoing in my mind. But the road didn't feel empty anymore. The air inside the car grew colder, the scent of decay stronger. And as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my stomach dropped. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, their hollow face staring straight at me. The figure in the rearview mirror sent a jolt of fear racing through me. I slammed the accelerator, the tires screeching against the asphalt as the car lurched forward. The road ahead stretched endlessly, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how far I drove, I wouldn't escape. My breaths came shallow and rapid as I gripped the wheel tightly, my knuckles white with tension. The trees seemed to close in, their branches forming an arch above the road that blocked out the moonlight. The only light came from my flickering headlights, their weak beam barely illuminating the path ahead. And then I saw it. A small structure emerged from the darkness, a dilapidated wooden shack sitting just off the side of the road. It was unremarkable at first glance, the kind of place you'd expect to see on a back road. But there was something off about it. The way it leaned slightly to one side, the way the windows seemed to stare back like hollow eyes. Against every instinct, I slowed the car and pulled to a stop a few yards away. The whispers, which had faded momentarily, returned with a vengeance, threading through the silence like a sinister chant. They weren't coming from the shack. They were coming from inside the car. I froze, my hands trembling on the wheel as my eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic hum that pressed against my skull. My chest tightened as I realized they weren't just sounds. They were words, fragmented and incoherent, but unmistakably human. Don't stop. It's waiting. Run. I turned off the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the whispers. The shack seemed to pulse faintly, as though it were alive, the shadows around it writhing unnaturally. My gut told me to leave, to hit the gas and drive until the road disappeared behind me. But something about the shack pulled me in, like a magnet drawing me closer. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. The road was eerily silent now, the whispers fading into the background as I approached the shack. The flashlight's beam wavered, casting jagged shadows across the warped wooden walls. The door was ajar, creaking softly as the wind nudged it open and closed. I hesitated at the threshold, my flashlight sweeping across the interior. The room was small and sparse, with a single wooden chair sitting in the center. On the chair was an object that made my blood run cold. It was the lantern. The same lantern I had seen earlier, swaying above the seated figure on the roadside. But here, it sat still, its faint glow casting long shadows that danced across the walls. The whispers returned, louder now, their rhythmic tones pressing against my ears as though urging me forward. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The air inside was stifling, carrying the same metallic scent that had filled my car. I approached the lantern cautiously, my flashlight beam trembling as it illuminated the chair. The wood was splintered and stained, as though it had seen far too much over the years. And then I saw the journal. It was sitting beneath the lantern, its leather cover cracked and brittle. My hand trembled as I reached for it, the whispers growing louder with each step. The moment my fingers touched the cover, the lantern's glow flared, casting the room in a harsh, flickering light. I opened the journal slowly, the pages yellowed and fragile. The first page was blank, but as I turned to the second, words began to appear, scrawled in jagged, desperate strokes. They're on the road. They follow the light. Don't let them catch you. My breath hitched as the words burned themselves into my mind. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and the lantern's light flickered violently. I stumbled backward as the chair shifted slightly, the wood creaking as though something invisible had just sat down. The journal's pages flipped wildly on their own, stopping on a single message. Run. You brought them here. The shack began to shake, the walls groaning as the shadows inside grew darker, denser. The doors slammed shut behind me, and the whispers overlapped into a chaotic chant. You can't leave. Not now. I bolted for the door, the journal clutched tightly in my hands. The lantern's light went out as I crossed the threshold, plunging the shack into total darkness. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and impossibly close. The footsteps followed me out of the shack, their deliberate rhythm echoing in the cold night air. I sprinted toward the car, the journal clutched tightly against my chest. The whispers rose behind me, their chaotic symphony threading through the darkness like a tangible force. The flashlight flickered weakly in my hand, barely cutting through the shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe around me. I reached the car and yanked the door open, throwing myself inside and slamming it shut. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, the journal vibrating on the passenger seat as though it had a life of its own. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the accelerator, the tires screeching against the asphalt as I sped away. The road ahead was a blur of darkness and jagged tree shadows, the headlights struggling to illuminate more than a few feet in front of me. My chest heaved with every ragged breath, and the whispers didn't stop. They were inside the car now, threading through the air like a malicious presence that refused to let go. And then I saw it. A figure appeared in the road ahead, standing perfectly still in the middle of the lane. It was the same figure I had seen earlier, the one with the hollow face and the unnaturally twisted silhouette. My foot hovered over the brake, but something inside me screamed not to stop. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a deafening roar as I gripped the wheel tightly and swerved around the figure. But as I passed, I saw something that made my stomach churn. The figure didn't stay behind me. It turned and began walking toward the car, its movements jerky and unnatural. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart pounding as I realized it wasn't walking anymore. It was running. The journal on the passenger seat flipped open, its pages glowing faintly as new words scrawled themselves across the paper. You can't outrun them. You have to face them. My hands tightened on the wheel as I sped faster, the engine groaning under the strain. The trees on either side of the road seemed to close in, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The whispers shifted, their chaotic tones resolving into a single rhythmic chant that made my blood run cold. Turn around. Turn around. Turn around. I refused. My eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, even as the shadows in the car grew darker, denser. The rearview mirror seemed to warp, the reflection twisting until it didn't look like my car anymore. Instead, I saw the shack, the lantern glowing faintly in the window, the hollow-faced figure standing just outside the door. The journal's glow intensified, the words on the page burning brighter. It's a loop. You can't leave. Break it. Break it. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the message. The road felt endless, the same stretch of trees and shadows repeating over and over like a twisted nightmare. The whispers grew louder, pressing against my skull until I thought I might scream. And then the car stopped. The engine sputtered and died, the headlights flickering out as the darkness closed in around me. My breath came in shallow gasps as I turned the key, but the car wouldn't start. The journal flipped open again, its pages glowing brightly as a single line appeared. They're here. I didn't need to look to know what it meant. The air inside the car grew colder, the metallic scent of decay filling my lungs. My hands shook as I reached for the flashlight, its beam weak and faltering as I swung it toward the back seat. There they were, figures with hollow faces and twisted limbs, their forms flickering like shadows caught in a dying flame. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stared, their presence suffocating as the whispers overlapped into a low guttural hum. The journal's glow flared, its pages flipping violently before stopping on a single word. Run. The figures moved then, their jerky steps sending shivers down my spine. I threw the door open and bolted, the flashlight barely illuminating the ground in front of me as I sprinted into the woods. The whispers followed, growing louder and more chaotic with every step. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches tearing at my clothes as I ran. My chest burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop, because they were right behind me. The forest was alive with the sound of pursuit. The whispers, now a chaotic symphony of dissonant voices, followed me relentlessly. My flashlight flickered, the weak beam barely illuminating the twisted trees and uneven ground ahead. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the forest itself was conspiring to drag me down. Behind me, I could hear them, the figures with their hollow faces and jerky, unnatural movements. The sound of their steps was faint but deliberate, each one echoing unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence of the woods. My chest tightened with every breath, the metallic scent of decay lingering in the air as though it clung to me. I stumbled over a gnarled root, nearly falling face first into the damp earth. The flashlight tumbled from my grasp, its beam spinning wildly before landing at an angle that cast jagged shadows across the trees. I scrambled to pick it up, my fingers trembling as I swung the light behind me. They were closer now. The hollow-faced figures moved through the trees like wraiths, their forms flickering in and out of focus. Their limbs bent at impossible angles, their movements both erratic and deliberate, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to my feet and kept running. The journal vibrated violently in my jacket pocket, its energy palpable even through the layers of fabric. I pulled it out as I ran, the pages flipping on their own until they stopped on a single glowing message. You're not running from them. You're running toward it. Toward what? My mind raced, trying to make sense of the words as the forest seemed to twist around me. The trees grew denser, their branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The whispers grew louder, threading through the air with an urgency that made my skin crawl. And then, through the shadows, I saw it, a clearing up ahead, bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. The ground glowed faintly, its surface marked with jagged symbols that pulsed with the same greenish light I had seen in the shack. The whispers overlapped into a deafening roar as I stepped into the clearing, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The air here was heavier, almost suffocating, and the metallic scent was stronger than ever. In the center of the clearing stood an altar, its surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe like living things. The journal vibrated in my hands, its pages glowing brighter as a new message appeared. This is the core. End it, or it ends you. I approached the altar slowly, my flashlight flickering weakly as the shadows at the edges of the clearing writhed and twisted. The hollow-faced figures stopped at the edge, their forms flickering like dying flames. They didn't step into the clearing, but their hollow eyes were locked onto me, their presence a suffocating weight that pressed against my mind. The whispers shifted, their tones resolving into a single voice, low, guttural, and layered with malice. You can't destroy it. You're part of it now. My hands trembled as I reached the altar, the journal's glow illuminating the symbols that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. The surface was cold and smooth, its edges jagged like broken glass. A faint hum vibrated through the air, threading through my body like an electric current. The journal flipped open again, its pages glowing as a single word appeared. Break. I hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Destroying this altar might end everything, or it might make things worse. But there was no time to think. The hollow-faced figures at the edge of the clearing were moving again, their jerky steps echoing unnaturally loud as they approached. With a scream, I raised the flashlight and brought it down on the altar. The glass-like surface shattered with a deafening crack, the symbols flaring brightly before extinguishing in a burst of light. The figures let out a guttural scream, their forms twisting violently as the light consumed them. The clearing erupted in chaos, the ground trembling beneath my feet as the whispers turned into a deafening roar. Shadows writhed and twisted, their edges fraying like torn fabric, and the air grew colder, almost suffocating. And then, silence. The light faded, and I found myself standing alone in the clearing. The altar was gone, the ground bare and lifeless. The hollow-faced figures were nowhere to be seen, their presence erased as though they had never existed. But the journal wasn't finished. Its pages flipped one last time, revealing a single chilling message. It's never truly gone. Not while you're still here. The clearing felt darker now, the trees pressing closer as the weight of the journal's words sank in. I stumbled out of the clearing, my steps unsteadied as I made my way back to the road. And as I reached the car, I realized the whispers hadn't stopped. They were quieter now, fainter, but they were still there, waiting. The road ahead was empty, bathed in the faint glow of my car's headlights. But the stillness was deceptive, a fragile veil over the chaos I had just escaped. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, the journal sitting ominously on the passenger seat. Its last message lingered in my mind. It's never truly gone. Not while you're still here. I wanted to believe the worst was over, that destroying the altar had severed whatever connection the hollow-faced figures had to me. But deep down, I knew better. The whispers were quieter now, barely audible over the hum of the engine, but they were still there, threading through the air like faint echoes of a nightmare. As I drove, the road seemed to stretch endlessly, the same jagged trees lining the sides, their branches forming an oppressive canopy overhead. The air inside the car was heavy, and the faint scent of decay lingered, no matter how many times I rolled down the windows. The journal vibrated suddenly, its clasp snapping open with a sharp click. My heart raced as its pages flipped wildly, stopping on a new message that glowed faintly in the dim light. You didn't end it. You released it. My stomach churned as the realization sank in. The altar wasn't just a source of power, it was a containment. Breaking it hadn't destroyed the entity. It had freed it. The air grew colder, the temperature inside the car dropping rapidly until my breath fogged the windshield. I reached for the heater controls, but before I could turn the dial, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the car, rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern that sent chills racing down my spine. And then the voices started. Soft at first, like a faint hum threading through the static. But they grew louder, more distinct, until they overlapped into a chaotic symphony. They weren't whispers anymore. They were screams. Angry, desperate, pleading screams that made my chest tighten and my pulse race. I slammed the brakes, the car skidding to a stop in the middle of the road. The journal vibrated violently on the seat, its pages flipping again as a new message appeared. You must face it. There's no other way. Face it. My hand shook as I turned off the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the screams that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. The road ahead was dark, the trees looming like sentinels in the shadows. And then I saw it. A figure stood in the distance, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It was taller now, its twisted limbs stretching unnaturally as it began to move toward me. The whispers returned, overlapping with the screams as the figure approached, its movements deliberate and menacing. The journal's glow intensified, its pages flipping one last time to reveal a single command: go to the light. I looked around frantically, searching for any sign of light in the suffocating darkness, and then I saw it. A faint glow in the distance, barely visible through the dense trees. It pulsed faintly, the same greenish hue I had seen at the altar. Grabbing the journal, I stepped out of the car, my breath fogging in the icy air. The whispers grew louder as I approached the edge of the road, the light beckoning me deeper into the forest. The figure was closer now, its hollow eyes fixed on me as it moved with an unnatural grace. The forest felt alive, the trees swaying gently as though they were watching. The ground was uneven, the damp earth sinking beneath my feet with every step. The light grew brighter as I approached, pulsing in time with the whispers that filled the air. And then I reached it. A clearing opened before me, and in the center stood a massive tree, its bark carved with intricate symbols that glowed faintly. The whispers were deafening now, their chaotic tones overlapping into a single guttural voice. You can't stop it. You're part of it. The journal vibrated in my hands, its glow intensifying as its pages flipped one final time. The words scrawled across the paper were jagged and desperate. Destroy the anchor. It's the only way. I hesitated, my eyes darting between the glowing symbols and the figure that now stood at the edge of the clearing. Its twisted form loomed in the shadows, its hollow eyes burning with malice. The whispers grew softer, resolving into a single chilling phrase. If you destroy it, you destroy yourself. The clearing felt like a trap, the massive tree at its center pulsing faintly with a greenish glow. The symbols etched into its bark seemed to shift and writhe, as though they were alive. The whispers had softened, but their meaning was clear. Destroying the anchor might stop the entity, but at a price. The hollow-eyed figure stood at the edge of the clearing, its form flickering like a shadow caught in a dying flame. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating, pressing against me like a tangible weight. The journal vibrated in my hands, its glow pulsing in rhythm with the symbols on the tree. The final message stared back at me. Destroy the anchor. It's the only way. My hands trembled as I reached for the journal's edge, its faint warmth radiating through my skin. The whispers returned, their tones pleading and mocking all at once. You can't stop it. You can't win. The figure stepped forward, its hollow eyes glowing brighter as it entered the clearing. Its movements were slow, deliberate, and impossibly smooth, as though it were gliding rather than walking. My heart pounded as I backed toward the tree, the damp earth sinking beneath my feet. The journal's glow intensified, its light washing over the symbols on the tree. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic chant that made my head spin. The figure stopped a few feet away, its twisted limbs stretching unnaturally as it tilted its head. You don't understand, it said, its voice layered with echoes. The anchor isn't holding me. It's holding you. The words sent a chill racing down my spine. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stared at the figure, my mind racing. Could it be lying? Was this just another trick to stop me? Or was it telling the truth? The journal flared brightly, its pages flipping wildly before stopping on a new message. It's lying. Destroy it now. I turned to the tree, my flashlight casting jagged shadows across its bark. The symbols glowed brighter, their light pulsating as the whispers reached a fever pitch. Gripping the journal tightly, I raised it above my head and brought it down against the tree's surface. The bark cracked under the impact, the glow faltering as the whispers turned into a deafening scream. The figure behind me let out a guttural roar, its form writhing violently as the tree began to collapse in on itself. The ground trembled, the air growing colder as the clearing was consumed by an unnatural darkness. And then, silence. The tree was gone, the clearing empty save for the faint outline of the journal lying at my feet. The hollow-eyed figure had vanished, its presence erased as though it had never existed. I reached down to pick up the journal, my hands trembling as I opened it. The pages were blank. I stumbled back to the road, the whispers gone but their weight lingering in the silence. The car sat where I had left it, its engine humming faintly as though nothing had happened. I climbed inside, my chest heaving as I gripped the wheel. As I pulled onto the road, the journal lay silently on the passenger seat. The forest around me was still, The oppressive weight lifted, but as the headlights illuminated the narrow path ahead, a faint, rhythmic tapping echoed from the back seat. I didn't look back. The journal sits on my desk now, its pages still blank, but every so often, when the night is quiet and the road outside is empty, I hear them, the whispers, soft and rhythmic, reminding me that some things can never truly be escaped. Have you ever wondered what secrets your neighbors are hiding? They smile at you in passing, wave as they mow their lawn, and seem perfectly normal. But what if there's something darker beneath the surface, something they're desperately trying to keep hidden? That's exactly what happened in our quiet little town. It all started with the new family that moved in next door. They seemed polite, reserved even, but there was something about them that felt off. The way they avoided eye contact, the heavy curtains that were always drawn shut, the way the house never seemed to have any lights on at night. At first, people whispered about them, harmless gossip, really. But then the strange things started happening. Dead animals turning up in their yard, strange noises late at night, and the faint smell of something burning, even when there was no fire. And then, one night, I saw something I'll never forget. It was just past midnight, and I couldn't sleep. I looked out my bedroom window, and there it was, a faint glow coming from their basement window. At first, I thought it was just a light, but then I realized it wasn't just glowing. It was flickering like firelight. And I swear, I could hear chanting, low, rhythmic, and haunting. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. What I found that night shattered any sense of safety I had ever felt in our town. It wasn't just a secret, it was something dark, something terrifying. And once I uncovered it, there was no going back. The house next door had always felt out of place. While the rest of the homes in our town were warm and inviting, theirs stood in stark contrast, its darkened windows and peeling paint exuding an eerie, unwelcoming presence. Even during the day, it seemed to sit in perpetual shadow, as though the sun itself avoided it. I hadn't paid much attention to them when they first moved in. The family kept to themselves, rarely venturing outside. The father, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes, was only seen leaving for work in the early hours of the morning. The mother, a pale woman with an unsettlingly still demeanor, occasionally tended to the overgrown garden, her movements slow and methodical. And then there was their son, a boy of no more than 10, who never spoke and always seemed to be staring at something no one else could see. The oddities began small. Late at night, I would hear strange sounds drifting through the air, soft whispers carried on the wind, too faint to make out. On more than one occasion, I saw their basement lights flicker on and off, accompanied by faint shadows moving behind the curtains. It was easy to brush it off as nothing, until the dead animals started appearing. It began with a stray cat. Its body was found in their yard, twisted unnaturally as though something had broken it apart. A few days later, it was a bird, then a raccoon. Each time, the animals were arranged in strange, precise patterns, their bodies surrounded by markings in the dirt that resembled symbols I'd never seen before. Rumors spread through the town like wildfire. Some said the family was part of a cult. Others claimed they were witches. My own suspicions grew stronger when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, a burnt, acrid scent that wafted through the air whenever the wind blew in the right direction. But it grew stronger with time, lingering like a warning. One night, the smell was so overpowering that it woke me from a dead sleep. My window was open, and the odor seeped into my room like a living thing. I stumbled to the window, gagging, and looked toward their house. That's when I saw it, the faint glow coming from the basement window. At first, it seemed like the flicker of a candle, but as I watched, the light grew brighter, its color shifting to an unnatural shade of orange-red. It pulsated, almost like it was alive, casting shadows on the wall that didn't match the shapes of the furniture inside. And then I heard it. The chanting was faint, rhythmic, and utterly alien. It sent a shiver down my spine, the sound threading through the still night air with an almost hypnotic quality. I leaned closer to the window, straining to hear, but the words were impossible to understand. They were guttural, sharp, and seemed to come from multiple voices at once. The longer I listened, the more I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like the air itself was pushing against me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A strange coincidence. My imagination running wild in the middle of the night. But deep down, I knew better. Something was happening in that basement, something I wasn't supposed to see. My curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing a flashlight, I crept out of my house and across the yard, my heart pounding in my chest. The closer I got, the louder the chanting became, rising and falling in waves like an ominous tide. The glow from the basement window danced across the grass, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch toward me as I approached. When I reached their yard, I crouched beneath the window, careful to stay out of sight. The smell was overpowering now, a mix of burning wood and something metallic, almost like blood. I hesitated, my hands trembling as I raised myself just enough to peer inside. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. The basement was filled with candles, their flickering flames casting long shadows on the walls. The family stood in a circle, their heads bowed, their hands clasped together. In the center of the circle was a symbol drawn in ash and blood, its jagged lines pulsing faintly with the same orange-red glow as the candles. And then, as if sensing my presence, the boy looked up. His hollow eyes locked onto mine, and a faint smile spread across his face. My breath hitched as the boy's hollow eyes locked onto mine through the basement window. His faint smile didn't feel like the innocent expression of a child. It was knowing, deliberate, and chilling. I ducked below the window, pressing my back against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. Had he really seen me? Or was it just my mind playing tricks? The chanting inside the basement continued, rhythmic and hypnotic, but now it was accompanied by a low guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath me. The acrid, metallic scent was stronger here, clinging to the air like a living thing. I knew I should leave, that whatever was happening in that house wasn't meant for me to see, but my legs wouldn't move. I had to know what they were doing. Creeping back to the window, I peeked inside again. The scene had changed. The family was no longer standing in a circle. They had turned toward something, a large, worn trunk resting against the far wall. It looked ancient, its surface scratched and splintered, with jagged symbols etched into the wood. The father knelt in front of it, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the rusted clasps. The chanting grew louder as the trunk creaked open, its lid groaning like it hadn't been touched in decades. Inside was a bundle of old, tattered cloth. The mother reached in, her pale hand steady as she pulled the cloth aside to reveal what was hidden beneath. It was a mask, carved from a dark, glossy material that seemed to absorb the candlelight. The mask was grotesque and inhuman. Its features were sharp and angular, with hollow eye sockets and a twisted grin that made my stomach churn. Symbols were etched into its surface, similar to the ones drawn on the floor. The moment the mask was exposed, the air inside the basement seemed to shift, growing heavier and colder. The boy stepped forward, his small hands reaching out to touch the mask. As his fingers brushed its surface, the chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. The candles flickered violently, their flames dimming until the room was bathed in an eerie, pulsing glow. I pressed closer to the glass, unable to tear my eyes away. The father placed the mask over the boy's face, adjusting the straps as the mother whispered something inaudible. The moment the mask was secured, the boy's body stiffened, and a low, guttural growl escaped his lips, a sound no child should be able to make. The glow in the room intensified, and the symbols on the floor pulsed brighter, their jagged lines shifting and writhing as though they were alive. The boy's head tilted back, and his hollow eyes began to glow faintly, the same sickly orange red as the symbols. The low growl turned into a laugh, sharp, grating, and completely unnatural. And then, as if sensing me again, the boy's head snapped in my direction. The glowing eyes beneath the mask locked onto mine. And this time, I knew he saw me. The laughter stopped, replaced by a single, chilling whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Come inside." I stumbled back from the window, my hands trembling as the flashlight slipped from my grip and hit the ground with a dull thud. The laughter inside the basement resumed, louder and more frenzied, as though it were mocking me. The faint hum beneath the ground grew stronger, vibrating through my legs and up into my chest. I turned to run, but something caught my eye. There, etched into the ground beneath the basement window, was the same symbol I had seen inside. It was faint, almost invisible, but it pulsed faintly with the same unnatural light. My stomach churned as I realized it wasn't just the basement that was affected. Whatever this was, it was spreading. The journal I had been carrying, an old notebook I used for jotting down ideas, began to vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands shaking as I flipped it open. The pages, which had been blank moments ago, were now filled with jagged, hurried writing. "Don't run. Don't look away. You're part of it now." A chill raced down my spine as the laughter inside the basement stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening, pressing against my ears like a living thing. And then, from somewhere deep within the house, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and impossibly close. The footsteps grew louder, their deliberate rhythm echoing through the walls of the house. My heart pounded as I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The basement window's faint glow pulsed like a heartbeat, illuminating the jagged symbol etched into the ground beneath me. The laughter from inside had stopped, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. I wanted to run, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the house, but my legs felt like lead. The whispers started again, faint and rhythmic, threading through the air like a sinister lullaby. They didn't come from the house this time. They came from the woods. I turned, scanning the dark tree line that bordered the yard. The flashlight's beam flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows across the ground. The trees stood still, their branches swaying slightly in the breeze. But something felt wrong. The shadows were too long, too sharp, stretching toward me like grasping fingers. And then I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the first row of trees. It was tall and thin, its outline barely visible against the darkness. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, watching me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the shadows, their forms flickering like flames as they moved closer. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic hum that pressed against my ears. My head throbbed with the weight of the sound, and my hands trembled as I gripped the flashlight tighter. The journal in my pocket vibrated violently, its pages flipping on their own until it stopped on a single chilling phrase. "They're coming. Don't go inside." I turned back toward the house, my pulse racing. The basement glow had faded, replaced by a dim flicker of candlelight that barely illuminated the window. The laughter was gone, but the oppressive weight of something watching me remained. My gut told me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible, but something kept me rooted to the spot. The front door of the house creaked open slowly, its hinges groaning like a warning. My stomach churned as the whispers shifted, resolving into a single voice that spoke directly into my mind. "Come closer. See for yourself." The figures in the woods moved closer, their hollow eyes glowing brighter as they stepped into the yard. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as though they were being pulled forward by invisible strings. My chest tightened as I backed away, my flashlight flickering weakly in the suffocating darkness. The journal vibrated again, and a new message appeared on the page. "Choose, inside or outside. Either way, they'll find you." I froze, my mind racing. The figures were closing in, their distorted forms flickering in and out of focus as they crossed the yard. The house loomed behind me, its open door like a gaping mouth waiting to swallow me whole. There was no escape, no safety. And then, from inside the house, came a sound that made my blood run cold, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was slow and deliberate, echoing through the walls like a heartbeat. My flashlight flickered out completely, plunging me into darkness as the tapping grew louder, accompanied by the faint scrape of something sharp dragging against wood. The whispers swelled, overlapping into a chaotic symphony that pressed against my mind like a physical weight. My breaths came in shallow gasps as I turned back toward the house, the open door now filled with a faint, pulsing glow. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a single, guttural voice. "It's waiting for you." I took a step back, my legs trembling as the figures in the yard moved closer. Their hollow eyes burned like embers, and their twisted forms cast long, jagged shadows across the ground. The journal in my hand grew hotter, its glow intensifying as another message scrawled itself onto the page. Inside, "It's the only way to end this." My heart raced as I weighed my options. The figures were almost upon me, their movements erratic but deliberate. The house was no safer, its darkened interior radiating an oppressive energy that made my skin crawl. But the journal hadn't lied to me yet. If it said the answer was inside, I had no choice but to believe it. Taking a deep breath, I bolted toward the open door, the whispers and footsteps blending into a cacophony of sound behind me. The air grew colder as I crossed the threshold, the oppressive weight of the house pressing against me like a vice. The door slammed shut behind me, sealing me in darkness. And then the tapping started again, this time from the walls. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, plunging the house into complete darkness. My flashlight was useless, its beam flickering weakly before dying entirely. The air inside was suffocating, heavy with the metallic scent of decay, and something far older, something wrong. My chest tightened as the tapping began again, slow and deliberate, echoing from the walls. Tap, tap, tap. The sound wasn't random. It moved, shifting from one corner of the room to the next, as though something unseen was circling me. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the journal, its faint glow the only source of light. The pages flipped violently, stopping on a new message that seemed to pulse with urgency. "Don't stop. Keep moving." But move where? The house felt alive, its walls breathing, the floor creaking beneath me as though it were reacting to my presence. I turned slowly, the journal's dim glow casting long, jagged shadows across the room. The whispers returned, louder now, their rhythmic chant threading through the oppressive silence. Closer, closer, closer. My breathing was shallow, each inhale laced with the acrid stench that filled the air. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if something was trying to get my attention. I swung the journal's light toward the sound, but the room was empty, just the same peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards I'd seen before. And then, from the corner of the room, came a low guttural growl. My heart raced as I spun toward the sound. At first, I saw nothing, but then the shadows shifted, pulling away from the walls to reveal a figure standing in the corner. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, burning like embers in the suffocating darkness. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its twisted form barely human. It stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, each step accompanied by the faint creak of the floorboards. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic symphony that pressed against my mind like a physical weight. My legs refused to move, frozen in place as the figure loomed closer. The journal vibrated violently in my hands, its pages glowing brighter as a new message scrawled itself across the paper. "It's not real. Break the connection." Not real. The words barely registered as the figure reached for me, its elongated fingers stretching impossibly long, their tips sharp and jagged. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the edge of a rug. I hit the floor hard, the journal sliding from my grasp and landing a few feet away. The whispers reached a fever pitch, their chaotic tones resolving into a single voice that echoed through the room. You can't escape. You're ours now. The figure lunged, its twisted form collapsing toward me like a wave of shadow. My hand shot out, grabbing the journal as its glow flared violently, flooding the room with light. The figure recoiled, its hollow eyes narrowing as it let out a guttural scream. The walls trembled, the tapping growing frantic, erratic, as though the house itself was trying to hold itself together. The journal's pages flipped wildly, stopping on a single desperate command. Find the source. Destroy it. The source. My mind raced as I pushed myself to my feet, the journal clutched tightly in my hands. The tapping shifted again, this time coming from beneath me. The floor creaked and groaned as the boards buckled slightly, the sound echoing through the oppressive silence. My flashlight flickered back to life, its weak beam illuminating a trapdoor in the center of the room. The edges were lined with the same jagged symbols I had seen in the basement, their faint glow pulsing in time with the whispers. My stomach churned as I realized the source wasn't in the house. It was beneath it. The figure screeched again, its twisted form writhing violently as it blocked the trapdoor. My chest tightened as the journal's glow intensified, its pages flipping one last time. The words burned themselves into my mind. It's trying to stop you. Don't let it win. I gripped the flashlight tightly, the journal's light casting a faint halo around me as I stepped toward the trapdoor. The figure lunged again, its shadowy limbs stretching toward me, but the journal's glow flared brighter, forcing it back. My hands trembled as I reached for the trapdoor's handle, the wood cold and damp beneath my fingers. With a deep breath, I yanked it open. A rush of cold air hit me, carrying with it the metallic stench of decay and something far worse. The whispers turned into a roar, and the figure let out one final scream as I descended into the darkness below. The air beneath the trapdoor was suffocating, thick with the metallic stench of decay and an ancient, oppressive weight that pressed against my chest. The flashlight's flickering beam barely cut through the darkness, casting long shadows on the stone walls as I descended the narrow staircase. The whispers surrounded me now, louder than ever, their chaotic tones weaving into an unsettling melody that sent chills racing down my spine. The staircase opened into a cavernous space, a hidden chamber that stretched farther than the house above could account for. The walls were carved with the same jagged symbols I'd seen throughout the house, their faint glow pulsing in time with the whispers. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, its surface cracked and stained with what looked like dried blood. And there, standing beside the altar, was the boy. His small frame seemed dwarfed by the oppressive space, but his presence was anything but weak. The glowing mask on his face seemed to pulse with its own energy, the twisted grin and hollow eyes radiating a malice that was far too old for a child. He stood perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as though listening to something only he could hear. The whispers softened as he turned to face me, his hollow eyes glowing brighter. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice layered with echoes that didn't belong to him. It was already too late. My grip tightened on the journal, its faint warmth seeping through my fingers. The pages vibrated, flipping wildly until they stopped on a single message. "This is the anchor. Destroy it." The boy tilted his head further, as if he could see the words in the journal. His voice was calm, almost mocking. "Destroy it? Do you even know what you're doing? This isn't just a place. It's alive. It's part of you now." His words sent a chill through me, but the journal's glow intensified, its light casting sharp shadows across the chamber. The boy took a step closer, the whispers growing louder as his hollow eyes locked onto mine. "If you destroy it," he said, "you destroy yourself." The altar pulsed faintly, its glow growing brighter with each passing second. Symbols carved into its surface seemed to shift and writhe, their jagged lines twisting into new patterns that hurt to look at. My heart pounded as the journal flipped again, its pages filling with a new message. "It's lying. The anchor binds it here. End it." The boy let out a low guttural laugh, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You can't trust it," he said, his tone sharp and menacing. You think this journal is helping you. It brought you here. It's part of this. I stumbled back, my mind racing. The boy's words twisted through my thoughts, planting seeds of doubt that took root almost instantly. The journal had guided me this far, but what if he was right? What if it was all part of the same trap? The altar flared again, its glow bathing the chamber in a sickly green light. The whispers overlapped into a chaotic roar, pressing against my mind like a physical force. The boy stepped closer, his movements deliberate and predatory. "Go ahead," he said, his voice a low hiss. "Destroy it. See what happens." The journal burned hotter in my hands, its light fighting against the oppressive glow of the altar. The words on the page sharpened, their edges jagged and desperate. "Do it now, before it's too late." The boy's hollow eyes narrowed, his twisted grin widening as he raised his hand. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, and the ground beneath me trembled. My chest tightened as I realized I was out of time. I rushed toward the altar, the whispers rising into a deafening crescendo. The boy screamed, his voice layered with countless others, as he lunged toward me. But the journal's glow flared brighter, forcing him back. The symbols on the walls twisted violently, their light flickering as I raised the flashlight and brought it down on the altar with all my strength. The surface cracked with a deafening crack, the glow faltering as the whispers turned into a single ear-piercing scream. The boy collapsed to his knees, his mask shattering into fragments as the chamber shook violently. The symbols on the walls burned brighter before extinguishing all at once, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then the journal flipped to a final page, its faint light illuminating a single chilling message. "It's over, but you're not free." The darkness in the chamber was suffocating, thick and oppressive, as though the air itself had weight. The altar lay shattered before me, its jagged remains radiating faint wisps of smoke. The symbols on the walls had disappeared, leaving behind bare stone that seemed to pulse faintly, as though catching its breath after centuries of tension. The boy lay crumpled on the ground, the fragments of his mask scattered around him. His hollow eyes, once glowing with a malevolent light, were now empty, blank. He didn't move, his small frame unnaturally still. The whispers were gone, replaced by an eerie, deafening silence that pressed against my ears like a physical force. I wanted to believe it was over, that breaking the altar had ended whatever dark presence had taken hold of this place. But the journal in my hand told a different story. Its pages flipped one last time, glowing faintly as the final message appeared. "You stopped it here, but it's not gone." A cold dread settled over me as I stared at the words, their meaning sinking in. The altar had been an anchor, yes, but not just for the entity. It was holding something far larger in place, something that had now been set loose. The ground beneath me trembled, a faint vibration that grew stronger with every passing second. The walls of the chamber began to crack, thin lines spreading like veins across the stone. The boy's body twitched once, then again, before his head snapped upward. His hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, he spoke in a voice that was entirely his own. "You shouldn't have done that." The chamber erupted in chaos. The floor split open, jagged fissures radiating outward from the shattered altar. A blinding light poured from the cracks, illuminating the space with an unnatural glow. The boy's body disintegrated into ash, his form swept away by a violent wind that roared through the chamber. The journal grew hotter in my hands, its glow flaring as its final words burned themselves into the page. "Run." I didn't need to be told twice. Gripping the journal tightly, I bolted for the staircase, the ground shaking violently beneath my feet. The walls crumbled around me, chunks of stone falling as the chamber collapsed in on itself. The whispers returned, faint and dissonant, threading through the roar of destruction, as though mocking my escape. I burst through the trapdoor, my chest heaving as I stumbled into the house above. The walls here were trembling too, cracks spreading like veins as the oppressive energy of the chamber seeped into the space. The front door was my only escape. I ran for it, the journal clutched tightly in one hand, and threw myself outside just as the house caved in behind me. The silence outside was deafening. The house was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble, but the forest around me felt no less oppressive. The air was cold, the trees still, and as I climbed into my car and started the engine, I realized something horrifying. The whispers hadn't stopped. As I drove down the empty road, the journal sat quietly on the seat beside me, but every so often I heard them, the faint, rhythmic whispers threading through the silence, reminding me that some things can never truly be escaped.